I never expected to walk back into that house. Not after everything that happened. Not after the way my brother Daniel and I had drifted so far apart. But when the phone call came, 3 words that cut through the silence like a blade, "Dad is dying," I knew I had no choice. My name is Jonathan. I'm the youngest of 2. Growing up, Daniel and I were close in the way only brothers can be. Scraped knees, backyard adventures, whispered secrets under bedsheets. But adulthood changed everything. While I pursued a quiet life, building a modest career as an estate consultant, Daniel stayed close to home, managing the family business with Dad. He was always the louder one, the charismatic one, the favorite in the eyes of others, or so it seemed. But I knew Dad loved us both. And even if our paths had split, I still carried a piece of that childhood bond. I wasn't going to let my father die without saying goodbye. When I arrived at the family house, it was like stepping into a memory. The smell of old books, fresh coffee, and aged wood. The hallway photos that hadn't changed in 20 years. And then there was Daniel, standing in the doorway with that same proud smirk he wore at 16. Well, look who finally shows up," he said. "Nice to see you too," I replied quietly, brushing past him. Dad was in the upstairs bedroom, hooked up to machines, his once strong hands now frail and pale. He looked at me and smiled, weakly, but it was a smile I hadn't seen in years. "Jonathan," he whispered, his voice dry as paper. "I'm here, Dad," I said, taking his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." We talked for an hour. About nothing and everything. Old fishing trips. Mom's terrible cooking. The time we both got locked out of the car in a thunderstorm. There was sadness in his eyes, but also peace. He had made his decisions, he said. Everything was taken care of. "I've named an executor," he added, his voice low. "I didn't ask who. I didn't care. I was there for him. Not the estate. Not the money." But something in Daniel's face at dinner that night made me pause. He was too relaxed. Too confident. Like someone who already believed he'd won something. When Dad passed 2 nights later, the house went still. I stood alone in the hallway after the paramedics left. Daniel didn't cry. He poured himself a drink. "To Dad," he said coldly, raising his glass without looking at me. It felt wrong. Detached. I walked to the study, Dad's favorite room. Leather chairs, bookshelves lined with old novels and legal texts. There, on the desk, was a sealed envelope addressed to me. "To Jonathan. Open after I'm gone." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a simple letter in Dad's handwriting. It read, "Jonathan, if you're reading this, it means I've left this world behind. I want you to know I'm proud of the man you've become. Honest, thoughtful, quiet but strong. You always cared more about people than money, and that's why I've made a decision I hope you'll understand. I've named you the executor of my estate. There will be surprises ahead. Stay strong. Do what's right. You'll know what to do. Love always, Dad." I stared at the words, stunned. Me, not Daniel. My heart pounded, not with excitement, but with responsibility. I knew this wouldn't go over well. When I returned to the living room, Daniel was on the phone, already calling lawyers, discussing assets like they were items on a grocery list. He didn't know. Not yet. I said nothing. I simply nodded and listened, filing away every arrogant word he said. Because what he didn't know, what he could never expect, was that I held the key to everything. Not out of revenge. Not out of pride. But because Dad trusted me with something more important than money. The truth. Daniel had always been the golden child. Growing up, it was clear who held the spotlight. He was louder, more athletic, the one who charmed teachers, neighbors, and our relatives at every holiday dinner. I was the quiet one, bookish, careful, reflective. Dad used to say I had an old soul, while Daniel had a fire in his belly. After Mom died, things changed. Dad became more withdrawn. Daniel, already entangled in the family business, stepped up, Or at least that's how it looked from the outside. But beneath the surface, I knew the truth. Daniel liked control. He liked being in charge. And most of all, he liked being seen as the center of everything. The last time we had spoken before Dad got sick, it had ended in a fight. Daniel had accused me of abandoning the family. I had accused him of suffocating it. So, when I returned after Dad's death and read the letter naming me executor, I knew that truth would hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. But for now, he still didn't know. The days leading up to the reading of the will were tense. Daniel had taken over the house, making calls, speaking to Dad's lawyer as if he were the one in charge. He even had the nerve to walk into Dad's office and start sorting through drawers, setting aside files and folders like trophies. One afternoon, I walked in to find him holding Dad's old pocket watch, the one that had belonged to our grandfather. "You remember this?" he said, casually turning it over in his palm. I nodded. He used to wind it every Sunday after church. "I always thought he'd give it to me," Daniel added, his tone light but laced with something darker. I said nothing. It wasn't the time. But I watched carefully as he placed the watch into his coat pocket without asking. That was Daniel. Take now. Apologize later. Or never. Later that night, we sat in the kitchen, silence thick between us. The tension was unbearable, so I broke it. "Daniel," I said slowly, "maybe we should wait to divide things until the will is read." He looked up from his drink, raising one eyebrow. "You think I'm stealing?" he asked, half laughing. "Please. We both know Dad wanted me to run the business. You don't even live here anymore." "That doesn't mean I don't care," I replied firmly. "You haven't been part of this family in years, Jonathan. You left. You made your choice." "No," I said quietly. "I just made a different one." He stared at me for a long moment, then smirked. "You always were the soft one." I didn't rise to it. I had no interest in fighting with words. Not when I held the truth in my pocket, folded neatly in Dad's handwriting. The day of the will reading finally came. We met at the lawyer's office, a tall, gray building in the heart of the city. The room was cold, sterile, with leather chairs and glass walls. Daniel walked in confidently, as if he already knew what was coming. He greeted Mr. Sanders, our father's attorney, like an old friend. "Let's get this over with," he said, flashing a rehearsed grin. Mr. Sanders gave me a brief glance, subtle, respectful, then began reading. As expected, there were the usual formalities. Charitable donations, messages to distant cousins, minor instructions about the house. Then came the big moment. "And finally," Mr. Sanders said, "regarding the management and execution of the estate, the testator, your father, Mr. Richard Morris, named one person to carry out all legal, financial, and asset-related decisions." Daniel leaned forward, fingers steepled like a CEO at a board meeting. "Jonathan Morris," the lawyer concluded. The silence in the room was deafening. Daniel blinked, then laughed, short, sharp, and confused. "There must be a mistake," he said. "Dad wouldn't. He knows I'm the one running everything." Mr. Sanders shook his head calmly. "There's no mistake. Your father made the decision a month before his passing. Everything was notarized and witnessed. Jonathan is the sole executor of the estate." Daniel's face turned red, his expression shifting from shock to fury in a blink. "You knew about this?" he hissed at me. I met his eyes. "No. I found out the day Dad died. He left me a letter." Daniel stood up, knocking over his chair. "This is ridiculous. You're not even part of the company. You don't understand how anything works." "You're right," I replied calmly. "But Dad trusted me to do what's right. That's what matters." He stormed out of the room, muttering curses under his breath. And as I sat there, alone with the lawyer, I felt the weight of what had just happened. I hadn't asked for this. But I wouldn't run from it either. Because Daniel had played his game for years. And now, for the first time, I was holding the board. The room remained quiet long after Daniel stormed out. Mr. Sanders, Dad's longtime attorney, looked up from the documents and gave me a slow nod. I imagine that didn't go how your brother expected. I managed a faint smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, it didn't. He closed the folder and sat back in his chair. Your father knew this might cause tension. That's why he gave clear instructions, legally and emotionally. He trusted you, Jonathan. He knew you wouldn't abuse this responsibility. The weight of that trust settled heavily on my shoulders. I hadn't come home to fight. I hadn't expected to be made executor. But now, it was my duty to handle everything. Dad's assets, his business, his legacy. And Daniel. I left the office and walked out into the crisp autumn air, my mind spinning with what came next. Estate inventory. Real estate filings. Tax management. Family notifications. And, most of all, keeping my brother from destroying what our father spent a lifetime building. The days that followed were cold, and not just because of the weather. Daniel refused to speak to me directly. He stayed at the house, but it felt like living with a stranger, one who kept slamming doors and muttering under his breath. I, meanwhile, got to work. With the help of Mr. Sanders, I began sorting through Dad's financial records. There were more accounts than I expected. Investments, land holdings, private funds. My father had built a quiet fortune, more than either of us ever knew. But what struck me most was how meticulous he had been. Every file was labeled. Every document cross-referenced. Every asset listed with clear instructions. And in the middle of it all was a handwritten note, separate from the legal documents, addressed simply. In case Daniel tries anything. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. It didn't take long for Daniel to start pushing. He showed up one morning in the kitchen, coffee in hand, looking more put together than usual. So, he began, I've been thinking. Maybe we should speed this along. I looked up from the papers spread out on the table. Speed what along? The sale. The company. The properties. You're the executor, sure, but we both know you're not staying here forever. We might as well liquidate some of the assets and split things like adults. Split things like adults. The irony was thick in the air. I'm following Dad's instructions, I replied calmly. Nothing's getting sold until the audit is done and all the legal steps are completed. Daniel frowned. This is ridiculous. You're acting like I'm the enemy. I said nothing. He wasn't the enemy. He was just someone who didn't like not being in control. And for once, he wasn't. That night, I found something that made my blood run cold. Buried deep in one of the storage boxes was a flash drive labeled Company Finances, Private. I plugged it into my laptop. What I saw was shocking. Daniel had been secretly diverting funds from the company. Small amounts at first, but over time, the numbers grew. Unauthorized bonuses. Fake consulting fees. Phantom vendors. He had been bleeding the business dry for years, right under Dad's nose. But Dad had found out. There were scanned copies of emails, bank records, even a draft letter Dad had written but never sent, telling Daniel he knew everything. My hands trembled as I read it all. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was theft. And now it all made sense. Daniel's sudden need to speed things up. His obsession with selling assets. He was trying to cover his tracks before I found out. But it was too late. I had everything I needed. The next morning, I confronted him. I laid the flash drive on the table between us. He stared at it, then at me. "What's this?" he asked, voice flat. "You tell me," I said. Looks like a few things Dad never had the chance to bring up. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Finally he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think you're going to play hero now? Dad's dead, John. He's not coming back. And you're not going to ruin me with some stupid spreadsheet." "I don't have to," I said. "The numbers speak for themselves. You've been stealing from the company for years." He leaned forward, eyes narrow. "And what are you going to do about it? Turn me in? Drag our family name through the mud?" No, I replied, standing up. I'm going to do what Dad asked me to do. Protect what's left. Clean up this mess. And make sure the right people are held accountable. He stood too, fists clenched. You're a nobody, Jonathan. You've always been a nobody. I looked him in the eye. Maybe. But today, I'm the executor. And you don't get to take anything else from this family. I knew Daniel wouldn't go down quietly. He was too proud, too entitled, too desperate. And now that I had confronted him with the truth, the years of embezzlement, the lies, the betrayal, I had no illusions. He wasn't going to stop. He was going to strike back. And fast. The very next day, I received a call from the bank. Apparently, someone had attempted to transfer a large sum, $150,000, from one of Dad's dormant accounts into a consulting firm Daniel had created just a week earlier. The transfer had been flagged, of course. As executor, I had locked down every account with strict safeguards. But that didn't stop him from trying. I didn't even bother confronting him. Not yet. Instead, I tightened the walls. I notified Mr. Sanders. We added dual authorization controls to the entire estate. No money would move, no documents would process, no signatures would be validated without me. Daniel had officially been cut out of every legal and financial lever he thought he could still control. But like a cornered animal, he got reckless. 2 days later, I caught him in the study, rifling through Dad's filing cabinets. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low and calm. He looked up, unbothered. "Looking for a copy of the land title," he replied casually. "Figured if I'm still a beneficiary, I have a right to see it." "You don't," I said firmly. "Not without approval." Daniel smirked. "You really think you're going to handle all of this alone? You're not Dad, Jonathan." "I don't need to be Dad," I answered. "I just need to do what's right." He slammed the drawer shut and brushed past me. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "A big one." That night, I found the safe open. Dad's private wall safe, the one only Daniel and I knew about, was slightly ajar. Inside, several key documents were missing. The deed to the lake house. The original investment certificates for the vineyard. A signed, but undated, version of an older will. My heart raced. Daniel was trying to rewrite history. I turned the house upside down looking for clues, and I found one, tucked behind a drawer in the desk. A USB stick. Unlabeled. When I plugged it into my laptop, I discovered dozens of files, altered versions of legal documents, fake receipts, forged signatures. Daniel had been preparing an alternate version of Dad's estate, one that cast him as the dominant heir. He was going to present it as updated documentation in court. Use it to challenge my authority. To steal what he thought was rightfully his. He didn't care about legacy, or truth, or even Dad's final wishes. He cared about power, money, control, and he was willing to destroy everything to get it. I met Mr. Sanders the next morning and handed over the USB drive. He reviewed it all silently, jaw tightening with every new forgery. "This is criminal," he muttered. "Forgery, fraud, attempted theft. Your brother could go to prison for this." I nodded. "I don't want a scandal. I just want him stopped." Mr. Sanders looked at me seriously. "Jonathan, if you let this slide, he will never stop. He will come back again and again, trying to claw at anything you leave behind." I already knew that. But this was family. My brother. A boy I once played hide-and-seek with in the backyard. What do you do when your own blood becomes your enemy? That evening, I walked into the house and found Daniel in the living room, sipping wine like nothing had happened. I placed the USB drive on the coffee table. He froze. "You really thought I wouldn't find it?" I asked. His expression didn't change, but his hand clenched around the glass stem. "You went through my things," he said, voice quiet and sharp. "I went through Dad's things," I replied. "You broke into his safe. You stole documents. You created fake ones. And you tried to drain the accounts. Daniel stood, slow and deliberate. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Everything's backed up, and my lawyer has it all. One more move, and I press charges. We stared at each other for a long time. Two men who shared blood, memories, history, and nothing else anymore. You were always weak, he finally said. That's why Dad didn't trust you with the company. Maybe, I said. But he trusted me with the truth. And now, so does the law. He laughed bitterly, then walked away, not out of guilt, but because he knew the game was over. For now. Later that night, I sat alone in the study, surrounded by dusty books, the quiet ticking of Dad's old wall clock, and the heaviness of betrayal. I had protected the estate. I had done what Dad asked. But the cost was high. Daniel wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my adversary. And though I had stopped him this time, I knew he wasn't finished. Not yet. A week passed without a word from Daniel. No shouting. No surprise visits. No late-night arguments. Just silence. But I didn't trust it. Daniel wasn't the kind of person who gave up. He was the kind who waited, regrouped, and struck again when you least expected it. So I stayed vigilant. Each day, I reviewed more of Dad's documents, digging deeper into financial records, letters, even old journals. Part of it was about protecting the estate. But another part of me, I just missed him. Then, one morning, I got a call from Mr. Sanders. "Jonathan," he said, "I found something strange in your father's secondary will." I frowned. Secondary? Yes, he said. There's the main will, the one we read in the office. But your father left behind a supplemental document, technically called a codicil. It was sealed separately and marked confidential. I didn't realize it existed until I did a second pass through his safety deposit box. He paused. And Jonathan, it changes everything. An hour later, I was sitting across from him, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded the pages. The codicil was short, barely a page. But its message was explosive. To my executor, Jonathan Morris. If you are reading this, it means that I suspected Daniel might attempt to challenge my final wishes. Therefore, I've included a conditional clause, one that overrides distribution of any major assets should Daniel be found guilty of tampering, fraud, or theft related to the estate. Should such actions be proven with legal evidence, his inheritance is to be revoked in full and transferred to the remaining rightful heirs, or, if none exist, to charitable institutions of my choosing. You are authorized to act upon this immediately with legal counsel, without further court intervention. Do what must be done. Ed. I looked up, stunned. Mr. Sanders met my eyes and nodded. Your father. He was smarter than most. He saw this coming. My heart was pounding. This clause wasn't just a warning, it was a weapon. A legal shield. A final move from beyond the grave. Daniel hadn't just broken trust. He had triggered the clause without even knowing it. I spent the next 2 days building the file. All the proof was there. The forged documents from the USB drive. The attempted wire transfers. Security footage from the house. The altered will drafts. It was airtight. I didn't want to destroy my brother. But he had made his choices. And now so would I. When I finally called Daniel, he picked up after 2 rings. Well, he said, his voice flat, are you finally ready to stop playing Dad's little puppet? No, I replied calmly. I'm ready to finish what he started. There was a pause. I'm invoking the codicil, I said. You've forfeited your inheritance. He laughed. You can't do that. I can, I said. And I will. I'll take it to court. Go ahead. I have the evidence. You don't have a leg to stand on. Another pause. Longer. Dad wouldn't have wanted this, he said finally. I stayed silent for a moment. Then I answered, Dad wouldn't have wanted you to steal from your own family. But you did it anyway. The next week was a storm. Legal papers were filed. Daniel hired a lawyer. Loud, aggressive, expensive. But every argument they made collapsed under the weight of truth. Forgery, theft, tampering. The codicil held. The judge upheld Dad's clause without hesitation. Daniel's share of the estate, millions in real estate, company holdings, and personal wealth, was stripped away. His name was erased from the beneficiary list. All of it was placed under my stewardship, with instructions to preserve, protect, and, if necessary, donate. Daniel didn't show up to the final hearing. But I heard he was there, watching from the hallway, hands in his pockets, alone. Later that month, I returned to the house. The air felt different, lighter. I stood in Dad's study, staring at the books he loved. The quiet that once haunted me now felt like peace. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk and found a sealed envelope I hadn't noticed before. Final words, for both my sons. I opened it slowly. To Jonathan and Daniel. I loved you both in different ways. I trusted you, Daniel, to lead. I trusted Jonathan to protect. And I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that you would protect each other. If you're reading this separately, it means I failed in that hope. But know this, blood is a powerful thing. Forgiveness is harder than anger, but it's the only thing that heals. Use what I left behind wisely. Not just the money, but the message. You can't buy back what matters most. Dad. I folded the letter, tears quietly filling my eyes. Dad hadn't just left behind money. He had left a mirror. One that reflected who we had become, and who we could still choose to be. And now, it was up to me to decide what to do with everything I had won. After the court ruling, most people would have walked away. Victory was mine. Daniel had been exposed. The inheritance had been secured. But this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about something deeper. Dignity, justice, legacy. And strangely, as I sat alone in Dad's study, what I felt wasn't triumph. It was emptiness. Daniel was still my brother. He had betrayed me, yes. Betrayed our father. But something inside me still hoped that beneath all the bitterness, all the ego, there was a sliver of the boy I once knew. So I decided to give him one last chance. But on my terms. I invited him to lunch. Neutral Ground, a small cafe our family used to visit when we were younger. I didn't expect him to come. But the next day, he showed up. Late, of course. Wearing sunglasses, tension carved into every line of his face. He sat across from me in silence. Didn't order. Didn't even greet me. Just stared. I waited until the waitress left and then placed a folder on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, already defensive. "A new agreement," I said calmly. "One that gives you a way out." He didn't touch the folder. Out of what? Being publicly humiliated? Losing everything Dad built? Watching my younger brother turn into a vulture in a suit? I didn't flinch. Out of being the man you've become. Out of living like this. He scoffed. I continued. The document outlines a single option. You relinquish all further legal challenges, in writing. You sign a full non-dispute clause. And in return, I offer you a settlement, one final gesture of good faith. A sum, held in trust. Enough for you to start over. But with conditions. His eyes narrowed. What kind of conditions? No business ventures using the Morris name. No contact with our clients. No access to any estate property. And no media statements. In short, you walk away, quietly, with dignity, with one last chance. Daniel stared at the folder for a long time. "I don't need your charity," he muttered. "It's not charity," I said. "It's mercy. Something you never offered me." His jaw tightened. His hand twitched toward the folder. But he stopped. "You think I'll just take the money and disappear?" "No," I said. "I think you'll stare at the wall for weeks, angry and bitter, convincing yourself you deserved more. But then, maybe, just maybe, you'll remember who you used to be. He didn't take the deal. Not that day. He left in silence, the folder untouched on the table. But I saw the hesitation, the doubt, the crack in the armor. I didn't follow him, didn't call, didn't push. The trap had been set. It wasn't legal this time. It was emotional. I was giving him a mirror and letting him decide if he could stand to look at himself. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment. Inside was the signed agreement. No note, no explanation, just his signature, and the silence that followed. He took the deal, walked away. No press, no drama. The money went into a monitored trust, as agreed. I made sure of it. And then I closed the file for good. A month passed. Then another. No contact. And then, one morning, I received a call from a small business registry in another state. Daniel had applied for a license, under a new name. Different industry. Clean records. No drama. It wasn't redemption. But it was a start. And somehow, in the middle of it all, I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. That weekend, I returned to Dad's grave. I stood there in silence, hand in pocket, eyes on the stone. I did what you asked, I said softly. I protected everything, even him. The wind blew gently through the trees. Leaves rustled like whispers. I pulled out the final letter Dad had left, one I hadn't dared open until now. Jonathan, I knew this would be hard. I knew Daniel would fight. But I also knew something else. You'd do it right. Because you understand something he doesn't. Legacy isn't about money. It's about what we leave in others. If he ever turns back, don't meet him with hate. Meet him with strength. Quiet strength. The kind that listens. That forgives, even when it's not deserved. Because that's the kind of man I raised you to be. Love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully, tears forming. Dad hadn't just left me responsibility. He had left me trust. And with it, the chance to break a cycle. The estate took months to settle. Between paperwork, audits, property transfers, and untangling the mess Daniel had left behind, I barely had time to breathe. But slowly, the pieces fell into place. The company stabilized. The land was secured. The charitable donations Dad had quietly arranged were fulfilled. And with each step, I felt closer to peace. Closer to him. But one thing remained undone. The truth hadn't been told. Not to the community. Not to our extended family. Not to the people who had worked with my father for decades, who deserved to know what happened, and who protected what mattered most. So I made a decision. I organized a memorial event, not just to honor Dad's legacy, but to make things right. It wasn't advertised as anything dramatic. No press. No spotlight. Just a private gathering of close friends, business partners, and family. But I had a purpose, and it was time. The event was held in the community center our father had helped build years ago. Modest, warm, filled with photos of his life. At work, fishing with us as kids, cutting ribbons at charity events. People arrived slowly. Some with flowers. Some with tears. Some just with respect. Even Daniel's old colleagues came. The ones who used to shake my father's hand and say, "I'd follow this man anywhere." I stood at the front, watching the room fill. Nervous, but steady. When everyone was seated, I stepped forward, microphone in hand. Heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "My name is Jonathan Morris. I'm Richard's son." A soft murmur moved through the crowd, those who hadn't seen me since I was a teenager. I know most of you knew him as a businessman, a mentor, a friend. I knew him as something else too. A father who, even in his last moments, was still teaching me how to be a better man. I paused, letting the words breathe. What many of you may not know is that my father appointed me as the executor of his estate. Quietly, privately. He didn't want drama. He just wanted things done right. I saw heads turn, people whispering, but I kept going. He trusted me with more than assets. He trusted me with the truth. I explained, briefly but clearly, what had happened. No character assassination. No public shaming. Just facts. That Daniel had challenged the estate. That fraud had been discovered. That Dad, anticipating trouble, had added a clause protecting the integrity of his legacy. And that thanks to that clause, and the trust placed in me, his final wishes had been honored exactly as he intended. Silence fell over the room. A heavy silence. Then, one of Dad's old partners stood. A man in his 60s, glasses perched on his nose, eyes full of emotion. "I worked with your father for 22 years, he said. "He talked about you often, Jonathan. Quietly. With pride. He always said you were the one who understood people. Not just business." Another voice spoke up, one of our cousins. "I used to think Daniel would carry on the family name. But maybe it was supposed to be you all along." I didn't expect applause. But I got it. Not loud. Not forced. Just a slow, rising wave of acknowledgement. Respect. And something I hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. After the event, people came up to me one by one, shaking my hand, thanking me for protecting Richard's name. Some even apologizing for ever doubting me, for assuming Daniel would take the lead. But what mattered most happened just before I left the building. A woman approached me, tall, dark curly hair, wearing a simple gray coat. It was Daniel's ex-wife, Claire. We hadn't spoken in years. She looked tired, but kind. "I heard what you said," she murmured, "and I wanted to say thank you." I was surprised. For what? For not destroying him publicly. For handling it like your father would've. I didn't know what to say. She hesitated, then added, "He's different, you know. Quiet. Working somewhere honest. I think he's trying." I nodded slowly. "That's all Dad ever wanted," I said. "That we try." That night, I returned home and sat at the kitchen table. In front of me was one final document. The official closing notice of the estate. Everything was complete. Signed. Filed. Finished. I leaned back in the chair, letting out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. It was over. The storm had passed. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about what was taken from me, but about what had been restored. My father's legacy. My place in the family. My belief that sometimes doing the right thing does lead somewhere, even if it takes a long, painful road to get there. It's strange how life has a way of circling back. Months had passed since the court decision, the memorial event, and Daniel's quiet departure. Spring had arrived, trees blooming, the cold finally letting go. And with the warmth came a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not just silence. Peace. I had moved back into Dad's house, not because I needed to, but because something inside me wanted to restore it, not just physically but emotionally. What had once been a battlefield between two brothers had become a place of healing. I renovated the study, repaired the broken steps on the porch, restored the vineyard contracts Dad had quietly invested in years ago, even reopened the small scholarship program he had funded at the local high school. Little by little, I was rebuilding. But more importantly, I was honoring his name, not by being loud, but by being consistent. That was something Daniel never understood. One afternoon, I sat in the garden Dad used to love, a notebook in my lap, pen in hand. I was writing a letter, not for a lawyer, not for the courts, not even for Daniel. It was for myself. "Dear Jonathan, you did it. Not perfectly, not without pain, but you did it. You kept your father's promise. You protected your family's name. And somehow, you protected your brother too. You didn't need to destroy anyone to win. You didn't need revenge. All you needed was the truth. And the strength to stand in it. You were never the loud one. Never the favorite. Never the center of attention. But in the end, you were the one who stood when it counted. Be proud of that. Not with arrogance, but with peace. J. I closed the notebook slowly. 4 years, I had carried this idea that strength meant dominating, winning every argument, proving people wrong. But Dad had shown me something else. That real strength is quiet. It's the ability to stay calm when everything is falling apart. To keep your word even when no one's watching. To forgive, even if you never hear, "I'm sorry." That's the reckoning. Not the courtroom. Not the confrontation. But the quiet, invisible transformation that happens inside. Weeks later, I received a letter. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a single sheet. I was wrong. About a lot of things. About you. About Dad. About myself. You didn't destroy me. I did that all on my own. What you gave me, that deal, it saved me. I'm working now. Nothing glamorous. Just honest. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope one day, you'll believe that I'm trying to be someone better. Thank you, Daniel. I sat there, the letter open on the kitchen table, the house quiet. No music. No clock ticking. Just that letter. That moment. And in it, a release. Not everything broken can be fixed. But sometimes, cracks let in light. A few months later, I was asked to speak at the business council Dad helped found. They wanted to honor him posthumously. As I stood before the small crowd, I thought about everything we had been through, every betrayal, every decision, every painful step forward. And I told them the truth. Not the scandal. Not the courtroom story. Just the part that mattered. That Dad had raised 2 sons. One who was ready too soon. And one who never believed he was ready. Until he had no choice. I ended with this. If you want to know someone's strength, don't look at what they inherited. Look at what they protected when no one else could. They stood and applauded. But it wasn't for me. It was for the man who had raised me. And for the way I had finally understood him. Now, when I walk through the vineyard, I think less about the past, and more about what comes next. The legacy lives on, not in money, not in property, not even in names, but in actions. In decisions made when no one is watching. And in the quiet power of doing the right thing. Even when it's hard. Especially then.